So today we are discussing about cranial cavity, meninges and parts of the brain. So the cranial cavity, the upper part of vault of the cranial cavity, it is smooth, it is uniform, and the base of the cranial cavity, it is divided into three fossae: anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and posterior cranial fossa. So the base of the cranial cavity divides into three fossae: anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and posterior cranial fossa. So in the cranial cavity consists of brain, blood vessels, and brain together with its meninges, blood, as well as CSF. Okay, so the cranial cavity consists of brain, blood, as well as CSF. Okay, so coming to the meninges of the brain. So when we take the meninges of the brain inside, it is from outside inwards, it is covered by three meninges. Okay, what are those three meninges? Dura mater from outside inwards, arachnoid membrane, and pia mater. Dura mater, arachnoid membrane, and pia mater. Coming to the dura mater, the cranial dura consists of two layers: outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. The cranial dura dura mater consists of two layers. Dura mater consists of two layers. Okay, so dura mater consists of two layers: outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. Okay, got it? Inner meningeal layer. Outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. So the brain from outside inwards, it is covered by three meninges. Got it? So outer layer is the dura mater, and the middle layer is the arachnoid membrane, and the innermost layer which is in contact with the brain is the pia mater. Coming to the dura mater consists of outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. Coming to the outer endosteal layer, it forms the endocranium of the bone. It forms the inner periosteum. It is closely attached to the bone. Okay, so outer endosteal layer forms the endocranium. It is closely attached to the bone. And coming to the inner meningeal layer also, it is attached to the endosteal layer, but in some areas the inner meningeal layer invaginates to form folds. The inner meningeal layer of dura mater, it is fuses with the endosteal layer of the dura mater, but in some areas it projects inwards, forming folds. We call those folds as dural folds. We call those folds are dural folds. So the dura mater consists of outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. Out of these, the outer endosteal layer forms the endocranium of the bones and is closely attached to the bone. And coming to the inner meningeal layer, it also fuses with the outer endosteal layer, but in some area it undergoes inwards, it invaginates. Okay, it goes inwards and it invaginates, forming folds called dural folds. Okay, so these dural folds are four in number. One is falx cerebri, and the next one is tentorium cerebelli. Third one is falx cerebelli, and fourth one is diaphragma cerebelli. So this is falx cerebri. This is the falx cerebri. And what is the function of these dural folds? These dural folds, they store dural venous sinuses. They give space to dural venous sinuses. So what are these dural venous sinuses? These dural venous sinuses are filled with venous blood collected from the brain and its meninges. These dural venous sinuses. So in these dural folds, dural venous sinuses are present. For example, it is the falx cerebri. Falx cerebri here extends from the crista galli here, and up to the internal occipital protuberance here. This is the falx cerebri. Falx cerebri. Okay, so this falx cerebri consists of superior sagittal sinus as well as inferior sagittal sinus. Superior sagittal sinus is present here in the upper margin, and the inferior sagittal sinus is present here. Okay, and the falx cerebri and also striate sinus is present here. So the falx cerebri consists of it encloses three venous sinuses. One is superior sagittal sinus, and the next one is inferior sagittal sinus, and here we have striate sinus is present. Okay, and coming to the tentorium cerebelli, this tentorium cerebelli, it encloses the transverse sinuses as well as the superior petrosal sinuses. Okay, the dural folds are four in number. One is falx cerebri, and the next one is tentorium cerebelli, and the third one is falx cerebelli, and the fourth one is diaphragma cellae. Okay, and the fourth one is diaphragma cellae. So falx cerebri encloses the superior sagittal sinus as well as inferior sagittal sinus as well as striate sinus, and tentorium cerebelli, it forms a tent shaped one, and this tentorium cerebelli it encloses the transverse sinuses. We know that the superior sagittal sinus it terminates into the right transverse sinus usually, and also left transverse sinus. We know we have discussed them during the dural venous sinuses. We have right transverse sinus is present here and left transverse sinus is present here, and the tentorium cerebelli it encloses transverse sinuses as well as superior petrosal sinus, which communicates from the cavernous sinus to it opens at the junction of the transverse sinus with the sigmoid sinus, because we know that transverse sinus terminates into sigmoid sinus, and at the junction of the transverse sinus and sigmoid sinus, superior petrosal sinus opens up. So the tentorium cerebelli it encloses transverse sinuses as well as the superior petrosal sinuses. And coming to the diaphragma cellae, and diaphragma cellae it encloses the cavernous sinus, and we have falx cerebelli encloses the occipital sinus. Falx cerebelli it encloses the occipital sinus. We have discussed them in detail during the dural venous sinuses. Okay, so dura mater consists of outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer. Outer endosteal layer forms the endocrinium of the bone, and coming to the inner meningeal layer, and the inner meningeal layer it is also fuses with the outer endosteal layer, but in some areas it projects inwards, forming dural folds. These dural folds consist of dural venous sinuses. Okay, these dural venous sinuses they collect blood from the meninges and also from the brain, and also from the diploid tissue, and also they collect blood from the internal ear and orbit also. So the dural venous sinuses they collect blood from the meninges as well as brain, and from the diploid tissue, and also from the internal ear and also from the orbit. And these dural venous sinuses they are lined by endothelium, and they are devoid of valves, and they are devoid of muscular coat. Okay, so the inner meningeal layer projects inwards, forming dural folds. These dural folds are 4 in number. Falx cerebri, which encloses the superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus as well as the striate dural venous sinuses, and tentorium cerebelli it encloses the transverse sinuses as well as the superior petrosal sinus, and falx cerebelli it encloses the occipital sinus, and diaphragma cellae it encloses the cavernous sinus. Here is the diaphragma cellae, this is the tentorial notch, and this is the tent-shaped one. This is the tentorium cerebelli, and here we have falx cerebelli is present. This is the foramen magnum. This is the falx cerebelli which encloses the occipital sinus, and this is the falx cerebri. This is the falx cerebri which encloses the superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, and striate sinus. Okay. So that's about the cranium, and this about the outer endosteal and inner meningeal layer of the dura mater. Okay, and there is no extradural space, and this dura mater it is traversed by the middle meningeal vessels, and this dura mater it is traversed by the middle meningeal vessels. Okay, so that's about the dura mater. Okay, what is the important point in dura mater means the inner meningeal layer it projects inwards, forming dural folds which consists of dural venous sinuses. That's a very important point regarding the dura mater. Okay, and coming to the next layer is the arachnoid membrane, and the dura mater and arachnoid membrane they get separated from each other by subdural space. They get separated from each other by subdural space. They get separated from each other by subdural space, and the subdural space consists of cerebral veins. Subdural space consists of cerebral veins as well as a film of tissue fluid. A thin film of tissue fluid is also present in the subdural space. So what are subdural space? The space between the dura mater and arachnoid membrane, we call it as subdural space, and this subdural space consists of a very thin film of fluid and also cerebral veins, and also cerebral veins are also present in the subdural space. Okay, and coming to the arachnoid membrane. So arachnoid membrane It is a thin transparent membrane, and it bridges over the sulci of the brain. It bridges over the, doesn't dip into the sulci and fissures of the brain. It bridges over the sulci of the brain. Okay, so it is a thin transparent membrane. Arachnoid membrane is a thin transparent membrane, and deep to the arachnoid membrane we have pia mater. Deep to the arachnoid membrane we have pia mater. The space between the arachnoid membrane and pia mater we call it as the space between the arachnoid membrane and pia mater we call it as subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space consists of, subarachnoid space is very important. What is subarachnoid space? The space between the arachnoid membrane and the pia mater we call it as subarachnoid space, and the subarachnoid space consists of CSF. Subarachnoid space consists of CSF. CSF means cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, as well as main arteries of brain. So subarachnoid space is very important because it consists of CSF as well as the main arteries of brain. So all the blood vessels, most important blood vessels of the brain, they are situated in the subarachnoid space. Okay, so it consists of CSF as well as the main arteries of brain. And coming to the CSF, it is a thin film of fluid. CSF, it is a transparent fluid. It is comparable with that of the lymph. CSF, it is comparable with that of the lymph, and CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus. CSF is produced by the choroid plexus. So choroid plexus are nothing but the tuft of capillaries. Okay, tuft of capillaries, they produce the CSF. So CSF, it is produced by a tuft of capillaries. So nothing but CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus. CSF is a thin film of fluid. It is comparable with that of the lymph. It is comparable with that of the lymph of CNS. Lymph of CNS means lymph of central nervous system. Okay, brain and spinal cord together form the central nervous system, right? So the CSF consists in subarachnoid space we consist of CSF. CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus. CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus, nothing but the tuft of capillaries. Choroid plexus. Okay, CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus. It is nothing but the tuft of capillaries, and the CSF produced here, it is stored in ventricles. It is present in ventricles. The CSF, it is stored in ventricles. It is so the CSF present here is, this is the lateral ventricle. Okay, so CSF, it is present in the ventricle as well as in the subarachnoid space. Okay, so here is the lateral ventricle, and the lateral ventricle, this is the third ventricle. Lateral ventricle and third ventricle. So the CSF produced in the lateral ventricle, it passes through the third ventricle through one foramen. That foramen we call it as foramen of Monro or interventricular foramen. Foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. The CSF produced in the lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through foramen of Monro, and from the third ventricle here it communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct. This one we call it as cerebral aqueduct. The third ventricle, the lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through foramen of Monro. What are the ventricles? The ventricles consists of CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. So the CSF produced lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through foramen of Monro, and the third ventricle communicates with the fourth ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle. Okay, this is the fourth ventricle, and this is the third ventricle, and this is the lateral ventricle. And the third ventricle communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct. And here through foramen of Menginies and foramen of Luschka are present here. Foramen of Menginies is the median aperture, and here from the fourth ventricle the CSF enters into the subarachnoid space. So through the foramen of Luschka and foramen of Menginies, foramen of Luschka, through foramen of Luschka and through the foramen of Menginies present in the roof of the fourth ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle, and this is the roof of the fourth ventricle. In the roof of the fourth ventricle we have foramen of Menginies is present. Menginies. Sorry, this is foramen of Luschka, which is present in the roof of the fourth ventricle, and here in the median aperture we have foramen of Menginies is present. So through the foramen of Luschka and foramen of Menginies, what happens here is the CSF present in the fourth ventricle enters into the subarachnoid space. Okay, so in the subarachnoid space CSF is present. CSF, it is produced by the choroid plexus. Here these are the choroid plexus. So the CSF from the lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through foramen of Monro or interventricular foramen. From the third ventricle it communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct. This is the third ventricle and this is the fourth ventricle. The third ventricle it communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct, and through two foramens, foramen of Luschka and foramen of Mazzandi, the CSF enters into the subarachnoid space. Okay, so the CSF is present in the ventricles of brain as well as in the subarachnoid space. Okay. So the CSF, it acts as a shock absorber, and the gravity, specific gravity of the CSF and brain is same. So the brain floats in the CSF. It acts as a shock absorber and it protects the smooth nervous tissue. It protects the smooth nervous tissue, and also what is the other function of CSF means it nourishes the neurons. It provides glucose and oxygen to the neurons. It is the only tissue fluid which enters closely to the neurons, because the blood does not enter closely to the neurons. Only the CSF enters closely to the neurons and it supplies and it nourishes the neuron, oxygen and glucose into the neuron, thus it nourishes the neuron. And one more important thing is the neurons that doesn't receive oxygen and glucose, and they will die within 3 to 5 minutes. Thus CSF plays a very important role in nourishing the neurons. And what is the other important point is the CSF protects the brain. The specific gravity of the CSF as well as the brain is same. So the brain floats in the CSF. The brain floats in the CSF and it acts as a shock absorber and it protects the smooth nervous tissue. Okay, so that's about the CSF. So CSF, it is a thin film of fluid. It is a thin film of fluid situated in the subarachnoid space as well as in the ventricles of the brain. And the CSF, it is produced by the lateral choroid plexus present in the lateral ventricle as well as in the third ventricle. From the lateral ventricle, the CSF it is communicated with the third ventricle through foramen of Monro or interventricular foramen, and from the third ventricle it communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct, and from the fourth ventricle through two foramens. One is foramen of Luschka situated in the roof, and the median aperture, it is situated here the foramen of Mazzandi. Through foramen of Luschka and foramen of Mazzandi, the CSF enters into the subarachnoid space. Okay, and coming to that's about the CSF. On main arteries of the brain, we have vertebral arteries and basilar circle of Willis is present. So the main arteries of brain are also present in the subarachnoid space. In some regions, what happens here is the subarachnoid space. It enlarges forming cisternae. Here the subarachnoid space, it is enlarging forming cisternae because there are more number of cisternae are present. We call it, this is the cisternae of great cerebral vein, and this is interpedicular cistern is present. And here more cisternae. What is cisternae means? The subarachnoid space, they are enlarged to form cisternae. Cisternae means the subarachnoid space enlarges to form cisternae. We have cisterna pontis is present, cisterna magenta is present, and also we have cisterna of great cerebral vein is present, and interpedicular cistern is present here. Interpedicular cistern is present here. So more number of cisterns are present, nothing but the enlargement of the subarachnoid spaces. Okay, so subarachnoid space consists of CSF as well as the arteries of blood. Okay, and then coming to the innermost meninges is the pia mater. Okay, this is the pia mater. So the pia mater, it is divided into two, epipia and so the pia mater, the innermost layer is the pia mater. The pia mater consists, it is divided into two, epipia and pia glia. So the epipia is closely attached to the arachnoid membrane, and the pyaglia it is closely attached to the brain, and it passes, or it is closely attached to the brain, and it passes to the all the sulci and fissures of the brain. Pyaglia, epipya and pyaglia. Epipya it is closely attached to the arachnoid membrane, and pyaglia it is closely attached to the brain. Okay, there is no space between the pyaglia as well as the brain. There is no space between the pyaglia as well as the brain. So that's about the pia matter. So dura matter consists of outer endosteal layer and inner meningeal layer, and in outer endosteal layer forms the endocrinium, and the inner meningeal layer it is also attached to the endosteal layer, but in some areas it projects inwards to forming the dural folds. Dural folds are 4 in number: falx cerebri, tentorium cerebelli, falx cerebelli, as well as the diaphragm cellae, and these dural flows they enclose the dural venous sinuses which collect blood from the brain, meninges, diplo, internal ear, as well as from the orbit. Okay, and coming to the next is the next layer is the arachnoid membrane, and the space exists between the dura mater and arachnoid membrane. We call it as subdural space. It consists of some cerebral veins and a thin film of tissue fluid is present, and then after arachnoid membrane we have subarachnoid space is present between the arachnoid membrane and pia mater. In the subarachnoid space, CSF as well as the main blood vessels are present here in the subarachnoid space. And coming to the innermost meninges is the pia mater. Pia mater consists of 2, epipya and pyaglia. Epipya is closely invests the arachnoid membrane, and pyaglia closely invests the brain. It passes through all the fissures and sulci of the brain. Okay, so that's about the meninges of the brain. Okay, coming to the parts of the brain. So now we will see what are the parts of the brain. So the parts of the brain divides into forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, the brain divides into forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, so coming to the forebrain. Forebrain consists of prosencephalon and diencephalon. Forebrain consists of prosencephalon and diencephalon. In the prosencephalon we have 2 cerebral hemispheres is present, and the fissure in front of interventricular foramen. The part in front of interventricular foramen and 2 cerebral hemispheres constitute the forebrain. 2 cerebral hemispheres. 2 cerebral hemisphere constitute the forebrain. Okay, and coming to the diencephalon, prosencephalon and diencephalon. Diencephalon consists of thalamus. Diencephalon consists of thalamus. Thalamus it is situated here. The thalamus consists of thalamus, hypothalamus. Diencephalon consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, metathalamus, including median and lateral geniculate bodies, metathalamus, epithalamus, okay, epithalamus, and also subthalamus. These constitutes the diencephalon. So the forebrain consists of prosencephalon as well as diencephalon. Coming to the prosencephalon consists of cerebral hemispheres and the area in front of the interventricular foramen, and the diencephalon includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, metathalamus, epithalamus and subthalamus. And coming to the midbrain, midbrain consists of, in midbrain is otherwise nothing but mesencephalon. Midbrain it is otherwise called it as mesencephalon. Mesencephalon includes, here is the midbrain. We can see midbrain here. Here is the midbrain, and these two are the cerebral hemispheres. Here we have thalamus is present. The thalamus and cerebral hemispheres constitutes the prosencephalon. Okay, so this is the midbrain, and midbrain consists of crus cerebri, substantia nigra, and tectum and tegmentum. Okay, the midbrain consists of crus cerebri, substantia nigra, tegmentum and tectum. From before backwards. Tegmentum and tectum. This constitutes the midbrain. So here is the midbrain. Okay, here is the midbrain. Midbrain forms the mesencephalon. And it consists of crus cerebri, substantia nigra, as tegmentum and tectum from before backwards. Okay, so the midbrain is, this is the midbrain. And coming to the hindbrain. Hindbrain again divides into metencephalon as well as the mesencephalon. Hindbrain divides into metencephalon as well as the myelencephalon. Hindbrain divides into two: metencephalon and myelencephalon. Metencephalon includes pons and cerebellum. And myelencephalon includes medulla. Okay, so the hindbrain consists of metencephalon and myelencephalon. Metencephalon includes pons and cerebellum. Pons and cerebellum together forms, this is the cerebellum. Okay, and this is the pons. Pons and cerebellum together forms the metencephalon. Okay, and myelencephalon includes the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata forms the myelencephalon, and pons and as well as the cerebellum forms the metencephalon. These together forms the hindbrain. These two together forms the metencephalon and myelencephalon together forms the hindbrain. Okay, so the forebrain consists of two cerebral hemispheres as well as the thalamus. Midbrain consists of mesencephalon. Mesencephalon consists of crux cerebri, substantia nigra, tegmentum and tectum. And coming to the hindbrain consists of metencephalon, myelencephalon. In the metencephalon consists of pons and cerebellum together forms the metencephalon, and medulla together forms the myelencephalon. And here the midbrain, pons and medulla. Midbrain, pons and medulla. So midbrain, pons and medulla together forms the brainstem. Okay, these are the parts of the brain. So the brain consists of forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain consists of cerebral hemispheres as well as the thalamus and midbrain. Thalamus, in the thalamus we will diencephalon, thalamus, hypothalamus, metathalamus, epithalamus and subthalamus. And coming to the midbrain, mesencephalon consists of it consists of crux cerebri, substantia nigra, tegmentum and tectum. Here is the midbrain. And coming to the hindbrain, pons and cerebellum forms the metencephalon, and medulla oblongata forms the myelencephalon. And here midbrain, pons and medulla forms the brainstem. So these are the parts of the brain. Okay, cerebral hemispheres, and this is the midbrain, this is the pons, this is the cerebellum, and this is the medulla oblongata. Here we have thalamus is present, and this is the corpus callosum. Okay, this is the corpus callosum which connects the two cerebral hemispheres, and we have lateral ventricle is present here, third ventricle is present here, and this is the fourth ventricle. Okay, the brain is covered by three meninges. From outside inwards we have dura mater, arachnoid membrane as well as pia mater. So that's about the meninges and parts of the brain. Next diagram చేస్తాను కొంచెం అది వర్క్ చేస్తాను.